They had catalogued humanity the same way they catalogued dust clouds and dead moons. A minor species from a yellow star, loud in its own records, quiet in the galaxy. Fragmented governments. Short lifespans. No unified doctrine. No ancient victories worth remembering. Humans had been observed for centuries, always skirting conflict, always choosing retreat over escalation. When borders shifted and stronger empires expanded, humans moved their colonies back without protest. When trade routes were seized, they rerouted. When threatened, they negotiated. To the galactic consensus, this behavior meant one thing: a species aware of its place. The invaders were old, older than most stars humans could see. Their fleets had ended civilizations that once spanned spiral arms. They measured war by efficiency, not emotion, and had long since stopped fearing resistance. When their expansion reached the human frontier, the assessment was instant. Humans possessed weapons, yes, but nothing extraordinary. Their ships favored modularity over brute force, survivability over firepower. A defensive species. A cautious one. The kind that folds when pressure is applied. The first encounters were almost polite. Automated warnings, proximity violations, resource claims logged and ignored. Humans did not contest the advance. They pulled patrols back. They abandoned outposts that had taken decades to build. Entire orbital habitats were dismantled and moved inward, away from the line. No threats were issued. No ultimatums delivered. Only one transmission repeated across every channel, simple and unadorned. Do not cross this boundary. It was not shouted. It was not accompanied by fleets or demonstrations of force. Just coordinates and a statement. The invaders studied it, replayed it, searched for subtext. There was none. No hidden weapons charging. No mobilization spikes. Human space remained quiet. Too quiet. The conclusion was inevitable. The message was not a warning. It was a plea. They crossed the boundary deliberately. Not with a fleet, but with a lesson. A single human colony on the edge, lightly defended, mostly civilian. Agricultural platforms. Families. Infrastructure, not warships. The strike was clean and precise. Orbital defenses neutralized in minutes. Atmosphere processors shattered. The planet's night side burned as systems failed. No military targets were prioritized because none were needed. The message was meant to travel faster than any transmission. This is what happens when you resist inevitability. They waited for a response. None came. No counterattack. No emergency broadcast. No declarations of war. Human space did not erupt in panic or rage. Trade lanes remained silent. Military traffic did not spike. To the invaders, this confirmed everything they believed. Humanity had drawn a line it could not defend and hoped words would suffice. When words failed, it froze. What they did not understand, what they could not understand, was that humans had crossed lines like this before. On their own world. Against predators, climates, plagues, and each other. They had learned, painfully and repeatedly, that survival was not about reacting first. It was about choosing the moment that mattered. The colony's destruction was recorded, archived, and acknowledged. Not publicly. Not emotionally. It was entered into systems far older than the invaders expected humans to possess. Systems designed not for diplomacy, but for continuity. For species-level decisions. The kind made only when retreat was no longer an option. The invaders expanded deeper, confident now. They spoke openly of annexation, of absorption, of how easily human space would fold once the pressure increased. They mistook restraint for fear, silence for surrender, mercy for weakness. They never considered that the boundary had not been drawn to protect territory. It had been drawn to protect patience. And patience, once exhausted, does not ask again. The absence of a human response became a source of amusement. In alien councils, the silence was cited as proof that humanity lacked the will to fight. Expansion continued, no longer cautious, no longer measured. Patrols pushed deeper into former human space, seizing stations that had already been evacuated, planting banners where resistance had never come. Each advance was louder than the last, meant to provoke, meant to draw out whatever courage humans had left. Still, nothing. Human channels remained dark. No emergency appeals. No fragmented pleas from broken governments. Even civilian traffic vanished, as if an entire species had exhaled and simply stopped speaking. The invaders interpreted this as collapse. Species fractured under pressure all the time. Unity was rare. Humans, with their endless internal divisions, were expected to shatter completely. What went unseen was not chaos, but convergence. Across human space, independent factions stopped acting independently. Militaries that had once argued budgets and borders synchronized without announcement. Shipyards that had competed for contracts were repurposed in unison. Civilian manufacturing quietly shifted output, not toward weapons, but toward components, hulls, reactors, life support redundancies, repair systems. Not symbols of power, but instruments of endurance. Human fleets did not grow larger in public view. They grew denser. Older vessels were not decommissioned, they were reinforced. Obsolete designs were not discarded, they were layered, refitted, given secondary and tertiary purposes. Humans were not preparing for a swift victory. They were preparing for attrition on a scale most species could not survive. The invaders escalated again, frustrated now. Trade routes were choked. Communication relays dismantled. Human worlds near the frontier were harassed, not destroyed, kept alive just long enough to spread fear. The strategy had worked countless times before. Fear fractured resolve. Fear forced surrender. But fear had already done its work among humans, long ago. It no longer paralyzed them. It focused them. Internal transmissions, never intercepted, carried no speeches, no fiery rhetoric. Only data. Casualty projections. Resource availability. Population relocation timelines. Humanity did not rally around anger. It rallied around responsibility. Every decision weighed not against pride, but against survival. They did not ask how to win. They asked how to endure whatever came next. As weeks passed, the invaders noticed subtle changes that did not align with defeat. Human colonies stopped transmitting civilian identifiers. Emergency beacons were removed entirely. Automated systems replaced manned ones, then went dark as well. Space around human worlds became empty in a way that unsettled even veteran commanders. No refugees fled outward. No desperate ships ran for neutral territory. Humanity was not scattering. It was pulling inward. For the first time, strategic analysts flagged the silence as irregular. Species on the brink of collapse made noise. They begged. They lashed out. They tried something, anything, to avoid extinction. Humans did none of this. Their borders became quiet walls, absorbing pressure without response. Deep within their territory, something else changed. Doctrines were rewritten, not for conquest, but for finality. Humans abandoned assumptions of mutual restraint. They removed limitations built for wars that ended. This was not preparation for negotiation. It was preparation for a conclusion that could not be reversed. The invaders sensed the shift too late. Their probes began to vanish without explanation. Not destroyed, simply gone. Long-range scans returned inconsistent data, space itself behaving unpredictably near human systems. It was dismissed as interference, as faulty instruments. Admitting uncertainty was weakness, and weakness was not tolerated. So they pushed forward again, convinced the silence would break. They never considered that silence was the signal. Humans were not hesitating. They were finishing their calculations. It began without announcement. No declaration crossed the stars. No ultimatum followed the months of quiet. One moment the invaders controlled the tempo of the war, and the next, their command networks fractured as if reality itself had shifted. Human vessels emerged not from predictable vectors but from impossible ones, arriving inside secure regions that had never known intrusion. There was no gradual reveal, no testing of defenses. Humanity struck everywhere at once. The first losses were not ships, but certainty. Sensors reported human craft that did not match known mass profiles, vessels layered with redundancy instead of elegance, structures built to keep fighting after catastrophic damage. They burned inefficiently, maneuvered brutally, and closed distance without hesitation. Alien doctrine prized preservation of assets. Humans treated assets as expendable tools, including themselves. Human attacks ignored conventional priorities. They bypassed border fleets and severed logistics, collapsing supply chains before commanders understood they were under assault. Relativistic projectiles were launched from ships that never slowed to confirm impact. Human captains calculated outcomes assuming their own destruction and proceeded anyway. It was not recklessness. It was optimization. The invaders attempted countermeasures, adapting as they always had, but adaptation requires time. Humanity denied them that luxury. Entire battle groups were drawn into traps that relied on sacrifice rather than superiority. Human vessels rammed, detonated reactors deliberately, turned debris fields into weapons. Damage that would have broken other species only altered human tactics mid-engagement. Confusion spread faster than fear. Humans did not pursue retreating forces. They eliminated infrastructure instead, collapsing starbases, erasing shipyards, targeting data cores that held centuries of accumulated knowledge. Victory was not measured by territory gained but by futures erased. Every strike carried the same implication: this threat will not recover. For the first time, alien commanders understood that humans were not fighting a war of dominance. They were executing a solution. Humanity had assessed the conflict as an existential variable and resolved it accordingly. There would be no cycles, no resurgence, no second phase. What remained after would be incapable of repeating the mistake. When the invaders finally concentrated their strength for a decisive engagement, humanity met them without hesitation. Human fleets advanced directly into superior firepower, absorbing losses that would have shattered morale elsewhere. Their formations were not rigid. Ships broke, reformed, and broke again, each loss feeding data into the next maneuver. Humans learned in real time, even as they died. The decisive moment came not with overwhelming force, but with refusal. Refusal to retreat. Refusal to preserve themselves for later. Refusal to accept defeat as an outcome worth surviving. When human vessels breached the heart of the alien command nexus, they did not attempt occupation. They triggered cascades that unraveled it entirely. Only then did humanity transmit a message. It was brief. Identical across all frequencies. No triumph. No hatred. You were warned. The realization rippled outward, carried by fleeing remnants and broken transmissions. Humanity had not been hiding weakness behind silence. They had been containing something far more dangerous, a species that, once committed, would not stop until the problem no longer existed. By the time the galaxy understood this truth, the war had already been decided. Entire sectors fell into blackout as human strikes destabilized navigation itself. Space lanes twisted, signals delayed, coordinates betrayed those who trusted them. Humanity had turned the environment into a weapon, rewriting assumptions that had governed interstellar war for millennia. Nothing behaved as expected near human operations, and predictability vanished. Those who attempted surrender found no immediate answer. Humanity did not halt to negotiate while danger remained. They pressed forward until resistance ended, not symbolically, but structurally. Only when hostile capacity ceased entirely did the advance slow, as if a switch had been flipped. Survival was permitted only once threat was impossible. In that moment, the galaxy learned that restraint had never been absence of strength, only disciplined delay before annihilation began. The galaxy did not celebrate when the fighting slowed. There were no victory broadcasts, no declarations of peace. What spread instead was a quiet, irreversible shift in behavior. Trade routes bent away from human space. Patrol patterns were redrawn to avoid even indirect proximity. Species that had once debated humanity's relevance now spoke its name with careful restraint, as one might speak of gravity or fire. Survivors carried fragments of the truth. Not propaganda, not exaggeration, but raw observation. Humans had not fractured under pressure. They had compressed. Every strike they delivered had been deliberate, targeted not at pride but at continuity. Systems were dismantled in ways that could not be repaired, command philosophies invalidated overnight. The war had not been chaotic. It had been methodical to the point of terror. Records emerged from human archives, quietly shared after hostilities ended. They revealed a history most species could not comprehend. Humanity had evolved on a world that tried to kill them daily. Predators, disease, climate extremes, scarcity. They had fought each other endlessly and learned, through devastation, what conflict truly cost. War was not foreign to them. It was familiar, studied, refined across millennia of survival. Other civilizations had risen during eras of stability. Humans had risen through collapse. Analysts finally understood why human ships were built the way they were. Why redundancy outweighed elegance. Why crews trained to operate without command, without support, without hope of rescue. Humans did not assume systems would hold. They assumed failure was inevitable and planned accordingly. Where other species feared loss, humans accepted it as the price of ensuring no greater loss followed. The remnants of the invading empire attempted reformation, but their allies had already withdrawn. Trust had evaporated. No one wished to stand beside a species that had provoked humanity and lived, barely, to tell of it. Diplomatic language across the galaxy changed overnight. Clauses were added. Exceptions carved out. One rule, unspoken yet universally understood, governed all future policy. Human civilians were not to be touched. Those who had surrendered spoke of an unsettling consistency. Humans honored ceasefires once resistance ended. Medical aid was given without condition. Evacuations were facilitated even for former enemies. Mercy existed, but it followed submission, not negotiation. Betrayal, however, was answered with absolute erasure. Humanity did not forgive twice. The war's end did not expand human territory dramatically. They did not annex worlds or impose rulers. Instead, they re-established boundaries, clearer and farther out than before, enforced not by constant patrols but by reputation alone. Humanity did not need to threaten again. Memory did that work for them. Younger species adjusted fastest. They studied human doctrine, not to copy it, but to avoid triggering it. Military academies rewrote curricula, adding entire disciplines focused on restraint, de-escalation, and recognizing the early signs of human withdrawal. Silence became feared. Calm messages were dissected with paranoia. When humans stopped arguing, everyone paid attention. In quiet councils, elders spoke of a new constant in the galaxy. Not an empire. Not a conqueror. A threshold. Humanity did not seek dominion, but they enforced limits with finality. They allowed diversity, conflict, ambition, until lines were crossed that could not be uncrossed. The galaxy had learned many lessons across ages of war, but this one eclipsed them all. Some species fight to rule. Some fight to survive. Humans fight so they never have to fight again. The war did not end with signatures or surrender ceremonies. It ended when human fleets stopped advancing and the galaxy noticed they were no longer there. Systems once filled with human vessels returned to stillness, as if the violence had been a passing storm rather than a deliberate act. Humanity withdrew with the same discipline it had shown in preparation, leaving behind no occupying forces, no monuments, no demands. What remained was law rewritten by consequence. Across interstellar councils, new protocols appeared without debate. Exploration charters excluded human-adjacent space. Military simulations flagged any action involving human civilians as catastrophic by default. Even the most aggressive powers adopted language of caution when humans were mentioned. It was not respect born of admiration. It was respect born of understanding what provocation truly meant. Humans returned to what they had always done after catastrophe, rebuilding quietly. Colonies were restored farther inward, more resilient than before. Habitats were redesigned not for beauty, but for continuity. Children were taught history without glorification. The war was not framed as triumph, but as necessity, a reminder of the cost of misjudgment. Humanity did not celebrate survival. It assumed responsibility for it. The remnants of the invading species scattered, their name becoming shorthand for irreversible error. In time, even their identity blurred, but the lesson attached to them remained intact. They were the ones who crossed the line. The ones who mistook patience for submission. Their fall was cited in negotiations, whispered in strategy chambers, embedded into cultural memory far beyond their extinction. Other civilizations adjusted their ambitions. Expansion slowed. Borders stabilized. Conflicts ended sooner, resolved before escalation demanded human attention. The galaxy became quieter, not because war vanished, but because its consequences were finally understood. Humanity had not imposed peace. They had defined the price of ignoring restraint. Years later, explorers would occasionally encounter human vessels at the edge of map space. They were unremarkable in appearance, functional, unadorned. They did not posture. They did not threaten. Communications, when exchanged, were brief and precise. Humans offered trade, information, assistance when asked. They behaved as they always had, before the war. But no one forgot what lay beneath that restraint. In academic circles, debates continued about whether humanity was dangerous or protective, tyrant or guardian. The arguments never reached consensus, because humans refused the role of ruler. They governed nothing beyond their borders. They claimed no authority over others' choices. They simply existed, present and capable, a constant reminder that survival was not guaranteed by power alone. When younger species asked their elders why certain routes were forbidden, why certain actions were unthinkable, the answers were always the same. Not warnings. Not threats. History. History of a species that endured everything thrown at it, learned from every wound, and chose, again and again, to hold back until holding back was no longer an option. Humanity did not announce its final warning because it did not need to. The galaxy had already memorized it. You should have left the humans alone. The statement endured not as propaganda, but as truth. A truth written in absence rather than presence, in quiet borders and unchallenged lines. Humanity remained where it had always been, neither dominant nor submissive, either savior nor monster. Just patient. And patient things, once pushed too far, end wars by making sure they never begin again.